Good morning, everyone. I'm going to get us started while people are still hopping on. I want to start by welcoming you to a programming partnership between the Chesapeake Foodshed Network and the Pennsylvania Farmers Union. My name is Yona Sipos, and I direct program development for the Chesapeake Foodshed Network through Local Concepts, LLC, a consulting firm providing development and backbone support of the CFN. Before our main event, which is why I know you're all here, I will provide a very brief overview of the CFN, or the Chesapeake Foodshed Network, and mention a few other webinars and food system activities coming up this summer. And then I'll quickly provide an orientation to Zoom before I hand it over to the Pennsylvania Farmers Union and our wonderful speakers for today. The mission of the CFN is to catalyze connections and collaborations that help build a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, including Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, New York, and Washington, D.C. We believe that by catalyzing connections and collaborations, we are better positioned to accelerate change in our food system. The explicit aim of the CFN is to grow connections, to get to know one another, to share information and knowledge, build trust and relationships with the thought that as we know one another better, we might over time see opportunities to align, collaborate, and contribute to collective impact. The Chesapeake Foodshed Network has been developing over the last 2.5 years among those out there doing the extraordinary work to advance our regional food system. If you participate in or support that extraordinary work, as well as the vision of a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system, please participate in the Chesapeake Foodshed Network. The CFN is open and free of charge to organizations, businesses, funders, agencies, and other change agents working across the Chesapeake watershed to build a stronger and more resilient food system. Please visit chesapeakefoodshed.net to find out more. Finally, before I give a quick orientation to Zoom, I'll just draw your attention to some of the upcoming programming that we have for this summer, and I'll just note that everybody is welcome. For more information on what's listed here and other programs, please check our website, and if all the info isn't up yet, then it will be soon. On to Zoom, which is the program that we're using today for the webinar. If you're on your computer, then you should be able to just hover your mouse at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you should see a Zoom control panel with various options pop up. The most important one there is the Q&A option. We invite you to click on the Q&A icon to open it and type your questions in at any point through the presentation. Heidi will be collecting your questions and moderating the Q&A period with presenters following their presentations. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Heidi Secord. And Heidi, you can start getting ready to share your screen. Hi there.
Hi.
And hi, I'm so glad to be doing this with you, Heidi. I'm glad to see you. And very pleased to introduce Heidi Secord, the state president of the Pennsylvania Farmers Union. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Yona. And just gonna share my screen here. Just give me a second.
Take your time. It's always learning again, doing these webinars.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, great. Pennsylvania Farmers Union, thank you so much, Yona. Glad to be here. Pennsylvania Farmers Union is a grassroots 501c4. We're a producer-driven organization, and although we're a state organization, our national body represents over 200,000 farm and ranch families nationally. Really, the key to our success and credibility has been Farmers Union's grassroots structure, in which policy positions are initiated locally. Farmers Union believes that a vibrant and prosperous family farm system, one that relies on each of us to play a role in creating it, is vital to our community and to our thriving communities. We achieve this through education, cooperation, and ag policy, both statewide and nationally. And we ask you to consider today becoming a member, if you're not, of Pennsylvania Farmers Union. Please check out our website, as you see here. It's pafarmersunion.org. Check out our benefits, check out our activities, and in particular, the next few years, we'll be working on this issue around Food Safety Modernization Act. Pennsylvania Farmers Union is participating in the National Farmers Union Local Food Safety Collaborative. And you can find that information under our education tab right here, under the PFU FSMA resources. Oh, whoops, I hit the wrong thing there. Sorry. There you go. You can see the webinars will be listed here, and they'll be recorded and available on our website, which you can then share with your members as well, or your friends. This project is aimed at enabling local produce growers and processors to comply with the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is funded through a grant from the Food and Drug Administration. This is our first year in this grant, and it's our outreach to our members and to Pennsylvania farmers. So today we'll be presenting part 2 of our webinar series, Where to Begin and On-Farm Lessons Learned. The instructors for the webinar today are Lindsay Gilmore and Jeff Stoltzfus. And I'd like to just give a brief intro to Lindsay and Jeff before I pass it over to them. Lindsay Gilmore is the owner of Organic Planet LLC and serves as a food systems consultant and as a personal chef. Lindsay has over 35 years of experience in the food industry and has worked with farmers for over 13 years to develop efficiencies and systems to meet the demands of the wholesale marketplace. Her current focus is assisting farmers with food safety compliance. Lindsay is qualified as a USDA internal auditor for the harmonized standards and is a qualified trainer for the FDA produce safety rule. Lindsay has a particular interest and experience in helping farmers work together to achieve food safety certification. She's currently managing a project in Mississippi for the Wallace Center at Windrock International, creating a USDA-approved single entity management food safety model as a viable solution for under-resourced small farm cooperatives. She continues to work with farmers and orchardists individually and in groups, helping them overcome their trepidation and develop food safety programs that make sense for them. And our other presenter, Jeff Stoltzfus, joins us from Penn State Extension, from Lancaster County team as a farm food safety educator. He spent 23 years as a farmer educator with the Eastern Lancaster County School District, working primarily with vegetable farmers, and has helped farmers start an onion growing cooperative and has worked with them in the areas of production and food safety. Jeff is a certified Produce Safety Alliance lead trainer, and he lives on a small farm, grows strawberries, pumpkins, and beef cattle. It is now my pleasure to kick off part 2 of our webinar series by introducing Lindsay Gilmore. So.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Yona. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Okay. So Jeff and I are going to, actually, Jeff, why don't you come on as well? Because we do like to go in and out with each other here.
Okay.
We're not going to be talking specifically about FSMA today. We did that in the first of this series. But if you have any questions about FSMA, please ask them. Just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean it's not always looming over all of us. And we're often asked questions about it. So please feel free to do that. We are going to really give a very abbreviated answer to the question, where do I begin? What are my priorities? Food safety on the farm. Then we're going to look at the food safety lessons that we and the farmers we've worked with have learned on urban and small rural farms and orchards. So here we go, launching into it. The very first thing you need to do with food safety is commit to it. Even if you don't have a customer requiring certification, or if you're exempt from the FSMA regulations, you want to start by taking food safety seriously and taking responsibility. It does not pay to not take it seriously anymore. There's too much at stake. So when you're going to incorporate any new systems, it's so much of it is about attitude. And if you are dismissive or just aggravated, no one on the farm, if you're the one in charge, no one on the farm is going to be taking this seriously. So even if some of the requirements seem counterintuitive or ambiguous, and they will, for sure, ultimately, you just don't want to make anybody sick. And if, as I said, if you want everyone to take responsibility for food safety in your operation, then it starts with the person in charge. And if you are not the boss and you have a boss or a parent or a spouse or a farming partner who isn't taking food safety seriously or is really resistant to it, you may need some help with changing their attitude. Figure out how you're going to do that. Sometimes that's my job when I go onto a farm and I'm acting as consultant and educator, and it's Jeff's job too. We have to actually get the people who are responsible taking responsibility. So what should I do first? Manager training. So there are, I'm sorry, I'm once again, I'm advancing 2 screens at once, so I get a bit confused. So you want to attend a GAP or a PSA grower training, the official FSMA grower training. In Pennsylvania, Jeff and his colleagues have been doing the PSA grower trainings, and there'll be many more of those. Jeff can talk about that. But in other parts of the country, there are still just regular GAP, Good Agricultural Practices trainings as well. And the PSA grower training is basically, it is a basic GAP training with the regulations woven through it. So both of those would be good. And then the next thing you want to do is train your workers in all of the health and hygiene and sanitation information that they need to be aware of and the practices that they need to implement themselves. And there are now lots of tools out there to help you train your workers and train yourself. And there are just a few here, and you'll be able to get this video, a video of this presentation. So you'll be able to go to these links and find what you need. There are so many different organizations around the country now that are providing resources that you don't have to try and make it up all yourself. And one of the first things I suggest people do is post signs. I have also been on farms where signs are posted and they're clearly not following the signs, but it is a way of reinforcing and demonstrating your commitment to food safety. And the visual communication is often very effective, especially if you place them in places where people see them repeatedly, like the bathroom wall or in the break area. This can be really a useful thing to do. And there are lots of signs out there as well. And NC State has created many of these posters. They're specifically, some of them for U-pick strawberry operations, but the main messages are just general food safety guidelines. So you can use these. I think most of these, I think I picked ones that were more general. You can also make up your own signs. I kind of like this one that I found on the web. But keep in mind that signs alone will not change behavior unless they're reinforced with training and supervision. So another thing you want to do is make it as easy as possible to do the right thing. So you can set up hand washing facilities wherever they're needed, such as near the field or in the packing area. They don't have to be just in the bathrooms. You want to store gloves and first aid kits in plain sight. You want to place logs in convenient places where it's really easy to just reach for them and fill them out. You want to install safe and convenient places for equipment to be stored as well. And then kind of the heart of food safety is doing risk assessment. With the harmonized food safety standards that Jeff and I work with, the key part about that, and many food safety standards, is risk assessment. And the idea here is you decide whether or not there is a risk, and then you work on where the problems are, rather than just doing things for the sake of it. So it saves you time, and it also gives you a real insight into your operation. So I'm going to go through the different areas of risk and hazard that you need to look at, and just get them in your brain and give you some images of things that shouldn't be there. And as we go through this, you could think about how you may be already mitigating that risk or reducing that risk. And you can also do a food safety self-assessment or self-audit. That's something that's required if you're going to get a harmonized audit, a USDA harmonized audit. I think most food safety, a lot of them require you to do a self-audit. So you can find a form that I created at the Fair Food Philly website, and on the Penn State website, there's a self-audit form also. And this you want to do every year. So risk assessment, first one is wildlife, is animals, critters. You want to assess the risks on your farm. So do you have a problem? Oops, sorry. Do you have a problem with wildlife? Are you using any deterrents or preventative action? Are you using smoke bombs to rid yourself of groundhogs? Are you putting netting over blueberry bushes? Are you using any noisemakers? Those big crazy waving arm things that you see at used car lots, those apparently are quite useful. Aluminum pans strung up, whatever it is you're doing, you want to make sure that you are taking action if you need to, and you're paying attention to that. And then how are you keeping domestic animals and livestock out of your crops if you do have livestock on your farm? And if you, I mean, it's very typical for dogs to follow you into the field. You really need to train them not to. And we're going to talk about cats a little bit later. And then the next risk assessment, actually, there's no particular order to this. Another risk assessment you want to do is land use and the history of your land use. So what was your land used for before you farmed it? Very often it was just used for crops or pastured animals, and it's not really an issue. But if there's been manure storage or a whole lot of trash or a whole lot of rusted cars, which is unusual, but this was a farm, then there may be some soil testing you need to do, some remediation that you need to do. And then what's uphill from your crops? Is there some kind of feedlot up the hill from you? Have you done anything to divert the runoff? I've even seen it even on a smaller Amish farm where the barnyard where the horses and the cattle were kept, or the barn where the horses and cattle were kept, the runoff from that barn was going right into the broccoli fields. So they needed to dig a trench or put in a berm or something to divert that manure runoff. Next one is raw manure. So you want to think about if there is any raw manure used on your farm. Are you storing it? How are you spreading it? Is there any risk of runoff? Is there any risk from the spray, drift from spray? Is your neighbor using raw manure? Is there any risk of that spray coming onto your fields? You want to think that one through. This is a very important risk assessment if you're using, or if there is any raw manure being used on or around your farm, and if you're storing it. And then water use and water source and use. Where do you source your water from, and what use do you put it to? Are two really important things to think about. If you're using surface water to overhead irrigate, that's the most risky, considered the most risky way of source of water and use of that water. If you are using even well water to in a dump tank when you're washing produce, then you need to think about using sanitation. So these are all things you've got to think through. You have to get water tested. You want to do that early enough in the season so that you can make changes. The least risky, or do it early enough in the season so that you can correct any problems that you might have. You may have to shock your well with chlorine. You may have to put in some kind of filtration system if you're using surface water and it's and you're using it for a risky process. You can't use surface water for drinking, hand washing, or washing produce. That is just not a good idea because you can't control it very well. But you certainly can use it for irrigation. So you have to think about how you're delivering the water to your crops. And then this isn't so much of a risk assessment that you have to make a note of, but it's certainly something you want to think about. So are you creating habitat for animals and critters that you don't want in areas? So we have here a big mess at one of the farms that I went to in the barn. Actually, both of the photograph on the left and the right are from the same barn, which I'm happy to say is completely cleaned up now. But you can see that there's a really good place for critters to nest in. There are birds' nests up in the rafters right above the stored packing materials. So this is the kind of thing you really need to take care of. And then the compost pile, recently I was at an urban farm where they had a compost pile that looked very much like this right up against their greenhouse. And even though there was no raw manure in that compost pile, it was a really great nesting place for critters that could then use the hoop house as their smorgasbord. So you want to think about where you're locating that kind of an open compost heap. And then something that you absolutely have to do for the harmonized food safety program is a pre-harvest risk assessment. And it's one of the first records that I recommend farmers keep. You're going out into the fields anyway, checking them daily, and it's not really a hardship for you to start taking a checklist with you. And you can customize this checklist for the risks that you need to monitor on your operations. Now, on this checklist, I've actually combined animal monitoring and pre-harvest risk assessment, so you just have one log for both of those. The animal monitoring starts really early on in the growing cycle, and the pre-harvest risk assessment starts when you actually are about to harvest. But you can use the same log for both. And I do, as much as possible, I try and combine logs so that you can reduce the documentation. The other thing you need to really start to think about is traceability, creating some kind of lot system. Is it a day of harvest? Is it, you can also use what's called a clean break. So the lot could be in between the cleaning of your packing facility or your packing equipment. You have to decide what makes the most sense for a lot. And that lot number should be on your boxes and it should be on your invoices. And when you're thinking about deciding how large, what your lot will be, think about how you can reduce the amount of product that will be affected if there has to be a recall. You don't want to have a week's worth of product being recalled because your lot system included too many days of harvesting. You want to keep harvest records. I'm sure most of you are doing that already. You don't have to do anything different there if you're already keeping harvest records, but it'll help you to trace back to whatever it is you may have had a problem with. And you're tracing, you want to be able to do one step back and one step forward in your traceability. So one step back to the field and one step forward to the trucker and the customer, the transporter and the customer. And then if you're covered by FSMA and you have to actually comply with FSMA regulations, you're not required to have a food safety plan on a produce farm, but by the time you've done everything else that you have to do to comply with FSMA, you may as well have a plan. And it really does help you to organize everything and figure out what your risks are. The key with the food safety plan is that you're writing down what you're already doing. So hopefully. And it will also make you think of things that you haven't thought of before. So Jeff and I both do food safety plan writing classes. I also work one-on-one with people to do this. There are other folks out there that can help you do this. Get all the help you can. See if you can borrow something from someone else who already has a food safety program in place. That's a great way to start as well. And then you can just change it to fit your operation. But you do have to customize it. You can't just take somebody else's plan and say, I have a food safety plan. You need to read it, understand it, get it in your brain, and then implement it. So this is, Jeff, this is my last slide before you take over for a while. So once you and your staff have training and you've assessed the risks and addressed your risks, and you have a plan and you're keeping records, and if your customer requires a food safety audit, and only if they require a food safety audit, do you actually schedule the audit. You don't need to have an audit unless somebody's saying you have to have an audit. The inspection for FSMA is a whole other thing, as we talked about in the last webinar. We're hoping that as things develop, if you have a third-party food safety audit that your customer requires, that will also qualify as an FDA inspection. There's a lot of work being done to try and make that happen so that you don't have to have both. Jeff, do you want to jump in here with?
Sure. And just to get a feel for, I don't know how many of you folks have done an audit, but Yona, if you could do the poll or the question and just see how many of these folks have are required to do an audit, just so we have an idea.
Great. And the poll is up now, Jeff. So people are just taking a minute to read the question and fill it in here. Might be worth just reading it out in case anybody is phoning in.
Yeah.
And so the question is, have you been asked by a buyer to have a gap audit? And it's just a yes or no option. Maybe just a couple more seconds. But it looks like not. People have not been asked. I'll show you the results here. I'm going to close it up.
Okay, well that's good. That's what we wanted to know. I'm curious as to see how many people have experience with being audited. Lindsay and I have been working together on a group gap project, so we had the opportunity to be auditors.
Internal auditors.
Internal auditors, yes. Went through the training and had a chance to walk through a lot of farms. And as she was talking, one of the things that struck me was that as an auditor, I soon found when I went to a farm, the audit began as soon as I turned into the driveway. First impressions really matter. When you pull into a farm, some of those pictures that Lindsay showed of cluttered packing sheds, those things really matter. So there is some things you want to do. It's like preparing for a test, I guess. You want to prepare a few things for the audit. But in my role as an educator here at Penn State, we often get this question, and I'll get the phone call, and it says, so my buyer wants an audit certificate. Can I get one by Monday? I harvested 5 extra bins of cabbage. I'm trying to get rid of it. Found a buyer, but he needs a certificate. Can I get one by Monday? I usually get these calls on Thursday or Friday, as if I have certificates in my desk here that I can pull out and hand you. And the answer to that is obviously no. We can't do that. If we're going to get an audit, or if we need to have an audit, those are things that you want to think about at least 6 months in advance, because there's some things, as Lindsay mentioned, that we need to go through to do that. So some of the first things you need to think about, as Lindsay mentioned, you need to get some training so we have a little understanding of what it is you're supposed to do. Write a food safety plan, as she mentioned, is the next step, and ideally you do that in the winter or off season. And then as you go through the season, you start to keep logs and take water tests. And I have worked with farmers. I'm working with farmers now that are trying to get a plan written for this season. It's a little stressful because right now they're into the midst of harvest or planting or all the other things, and they're trying to do this paperwork, which gets a little frustrating when you have a lot of field work to do, unless you have a lot of rainy days. So it's been a struggle. Ideally, you want to try and do that earlier in the season. And when people start looking at gap audits, one of the things that really frustrates folks is the time and management that goes into it. Because in the midst of all the other things you do when you wake up in the morning to decide if you have enough help for the day, if you have enough markets for the crop that you have out there, what do you need to do to control insects and pests and plant and manage all those things. In the midst of all that, then we ask you to keep logs and take water tests and do other stuff. And it gets frustrating. And one of the things that I have told farmers that I have found farmers will, the good farmers, successful farmers have done, is they delegate that some of that work. So whoever is harvesting, your harvest crew knows that they should sanitize the clippers before they go to the field. And you make that as easy as possible. You put the log right there where in the room where you have the clippers, along with the sanitation spray bottle or whatever you're using, and it becomes part of the daily routine. Even on small farms, family farms. One Amish farmer told me that his 8-year-old loved to read the thermometer on the cooler. And so he had a temperature log. His 8-year-old every day would check that faithfully and write it down. So he didn't have to worry about that. Last night, I took the flip chart that we use to train workers home. My 13-year-old said that's something she wanted to do. I handed it to her and said, "Congratulations, you've been appointed. You're now in charge of worker training." And so those are some of the things that you can help, even on a small farm, delegate some of that kind of stuff. And once you make it part of your routine, for the most part, it's not as much of an issue. And then once you're ready get all of those things in place, then you're ready to arrange for the audit. And that, again, can't be done on Friday if you want the audit done on Monday. Most of the auditors have very full, busy schedules. So ideally, they'd need a minimum of probably 30 days. Some of them may work with you to do it in a couple of weeks, but 60 days is even better. If you can let them know that you'd like an audit in a couple months, they can manage their schedule and make that work. And I will talk a little bit about, maybe be a good place to talk a little bit about audits that are out there and who does them. As Lindsay and I mentioned, we did internal audits for a group gap system. We are not professional auditors.
We're not professional external auditors, third-party auditors.
That's correct.
We are professionals, Jeff.
Well, we try to make some money. But yeah, so it's USDA will do harmonized audits. They can do the GAP-GIP audits. In Pennsylvania, they work out of the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. There are a number of other certifying bodies that are out there. Some that work a lot with small farmers. EquiCert and Quality Fresh LLC are two that work with small farms in Pennsylvania. And then there are the bigger audits, Primus and some of the other ones where you have to, Canada Gap, where you have to fly auditors in sometimes from out of state to do your audits. So I guess part of it is decide who it is that you want to do your audits. But I thought we'd run through a little example of a group of farmers that I've worked with, the Lancaster Vegetable Farmers Cooperative. Right now it's well, they're up to about 100 growers, about 80 of them grow onions, about 120 acres of onions. Since we have 80 farmers, that means we have to have 80 audits for the co-op, and which is what got Lindsay and I into Group GAP a few years ago. We thought that seemed a little unfair when you consider that one farmer may have 120 acres of onions in Vidalia, Georgia, and he only has to have one audit. We would have to have 80. So that's how we got into the Group GAP thing, and we won't talk a lot about that unless there's specific questions, but this is kind of an example of how we have done it. In 2011, we did it as kind of a pilot. Some of our buyers were starting to push us to work towards a GAP audit. So we took 5 farmers and we got them to go through a third-party audit. That was our first venture. 2012, 2013, we had EquiCert, which was a private company out of Illinois. They did a Group GAP audit for the group and the packing shed. And as we went along, the buyer requirements, the buyer demands kept going up. 2014 and 15, we participated in a Group GAP pilot project with USDA as part of the harmonized audit. And so we took our farmers through that. In 2016, the co-op themselves continued with the USDA Group GAP program through the harmonized. And this year, because of increasing requirements from buyers, we have had to go to Canada Gap, which is a GFSI, which stands for Global Food Safety Initiative. That's a group that benchmarks audits. And so we had to have a GFSI benchmarked audit. The harmonized audit at that point is not GFSI. I think that's changing. So we've gone to Canada Gap, which is Canada Gap is not a government agency. It is a private audit standard, and a group that is doing that. And so that's who we went with this year, and we're going to see how that goes. Each step along the way, our farmers have had to kind of step up and keep more detailed records and logs and more detailed audits. So with our group audit, we have a food safety plan template that we give to the farms. We can't have a boilerplate food safety plan that I can pass out to every farm. Each food safety plan has to be unique for the farm, but we can have some templates. There are a lot of things, a lot of policies that are fairly standard across farms, and so we can put some of those things down. We have some of those sample plans on the Penn State website. Many websites will have the university websites. Michigan has a really good one. Rutgers has some as well. So there's a lot of those out there, but you have to take those plans and customize it for your farm to talk about how you do things, what your risks are, because the risks vary from farm to farm. Even in Lancaster County, where you would think as you travel around to these farms that they're all very similar, they all have something that makes them a little unique, and they do something a little differently. One of the things we really like to do, and Lindsay still does a lot of this, I don't do as much of it anymore, but coaching is an important part the first year or two that you do an audit. It's kind of that hand-holding, the one-on-one, having somebody to call if you have a question, and have someone come out and look at your farm from time to time. It's a little scary to put together a plan, start doing some logs and records, and then have an auditor come out and have no idea exactly what they're looking for or if you're doing things right. So by having somebody coaching you the first year or two, they can kind of come out and give you a heads up as to what auditors might be looking for. And
what I tend to do is, if somebody already has a food safety plan, I will walk the farmer through their first self-audit. Mm-hmm. As if it's almost like a mock audit in a way, but they're filling out their self-audit, and as we go through all of the operations, and that helps them to feel more confident or to know how much work they have to do before they get an audit.
Yeah, and that's and after the first couple of years, after you've been through an audit and you get an idea, a sense of what those auditors are looking for, then it takes a lot of the stress out of it. The other thing we did with the Onion Growers Cooperative is we would do a pre-harvest twilight meeting, just as one last chance to tell farmers, have you got your water test completed? Have you trained your workers? Do you have your pre-harvest risk assessments done and ready to go? Making sure just that one last time before the auditor would come out that we would have a meeting that would kind of prepare the growers for that. We had record keeping templates, and again, you can find these on food safety websites just about everywhere. It gives you some ideas of what kind of forms and logs, some examples. So some of the things you'll need to keep, Lindsay mentioned some of these, manure records, pesticide records, obviously. If you're certified organic, a lot of these records you'll find that you already have. Food safety is a little bit easier for organic farmers, I think, because they're used to keeping a lot of records and keeping a paper trail. And some of the records that you keep for organics will be the same, but there will be additional ones for food safety. Worker training logs, pre-harvest risk assessment, as Lindsay mentioned, is one that would be unique for a food safety audit. Equipment cleaning records, animal activity in the field, and what you're doing in that regard. Corrective actions. Corrective actions are important. They're anything that you do on the farm that improves food safety. Auditors like to see corrective actions. I guess it's evidence that you're looking at problems and that you're proactive in correcting them. Lots of times on farms, we fix the fence and we move on. We don't write it down. But the auditors like to see the things that you've done on the farm that are going to be helpful for food safety. Water test. This is one that you would want to talk to an auditor ahead of time just to get an idea of what they expect. Different audit standards require different numbers of tests. And so auditors, I found, even have different interpretations of the audit standard. So you want to know, for example, do they require 1 test, 2 tests, 3 tests of all of your water sources? And you would need to test any water that's going to that's used in the operation. So that could be your well. If you're spraying fertilizers or pesticides, you need to test that water. You need to test irrigation water, any packing house water, any employee drinking water, hand washing water. All those sources have to be tested. Not all those locations, but all of the sources of those water need to be tested. And so you, depending on your standard, is going to determine how many times you need to test that water.
The one instance where you don't need to test is if you're using municipal water, but you do need to get a copy of their most recent test results.
Right.
From the municipality.
Municipal water, of course, is tested, is required by law to be tested, but you have to have access to those tests. Traceability records, as Lindsay talked a little bit about that. So this is just a shot of the packing house that they had, and some of the ways that they handled produce. And we had a separate plan for the packing shed that was audited as well, that dealt with cleaning of the equipment, cleaning of the floor on a daily basis, all those logs and records that needed to be kept. So what we've tried to do, what Lindsay's tried to do in Mississippi, you know, we work with a lot of small farms, and especially in Pennsylvania, that's kind of standard. It's not just unique to the Plain community or the Amish, but we have a lot of small farms. And it's hard, these regulations, you know, tend to be much easier for larger farmers. They can justify the cost of someone being in charge of food safety. They're putting, you know, hundreds of acres through one audit. And so they can spread that overhead cost out. So we've attempted to kind of scale the audit. We've looked at farms and said, what ways can these farms work together for food safety? And, you know, maybe 2 brothers working on adjoining farms, can we audit those 2 farms as one if they're very similar? Or maybe even 2 neighbors, or yeah, we've tried to think about different ways, because in reality, a large farmer, I know a large farmer who grows 1,000 acres, a lot of sweet corn, a lot of pumpkins. He owns 5 farms spread over 20 miles. It's all one audit. So are there ways that we could cluster or combine farms to try and achieve some kinds of economies of scale? So that's some of the things we're looking at. We don't necessarily have all the answers there yet, but we're open to ideas. That's part of the project that Lindsay's working on in Mississippi. That was our goal with Group GAP with the Lancaster Vegetable Farms. So.
Yeah, and we were actually able to do the single entity clustering in Mississippi, and they were successfully audited as one entity with 12 different growing locations as opposed to 12 different farms.
Yeah.
And we can, if people are interested, we can do a whole presentation on how to work together as a group.
And when you work together as a group, of course, the important thing is that, you know, it's just like a co-op. Now you've got to sometimes, you've got to have a lot of information sharing. You need somebody there coaching to make sure that everybody is working together, because in a group, you're as strong as your weakest farmer. And so we've had some farmers say, well, I don't really want to be, I don't want to share a food safety audit with this neighbor because I know that he doesn't do a very good job.
Or in one instance, my brother.
Yeah, in one case, my brother on the same farm, I want it to be a separate audit because I don't trust him as well. So yeah, it requires a lot of working together, and that's where the coaching can be really valuable. These are just two websites that Penn State has. I don't know why there's two, but there are. The first one, the foodsafety.psu.edu, is GAP's general information for developing food safety plans and getting an audit. And then the other one is our FSMA website, which has information on FSMA and upcoming trainings and those sorts of things. So I'll throw that up there.
Callie has given us some great questions here. I'm wondering if we should take a little break in the presentation, and I will read them out. So she asks, can you speak to situations where very small farms say that their traceability program is they have a daily harvest log and daily invoices, and if they were asked to say one step back and forward on where this is a long question, where the strawberries on May 11th, and they're able to look at their harvest log and know that the strawberries came from the field because there is only one field. I think that's the key. If you have a very small farm and that day you harvested strawberries and you have one field of strawberries, then yes, that is certainly sufficient for traceability. If your harvest log is, if you're keeping that accurately and it's obvious that you only have one place where the strawberries grew, then that is certainly sufficient. So the date that you harvested would be your lot number. Yeah. And then if you're putting that date on your invoice, then that's your step forward. So it says in some scenarios with everything above, a farm may also have a label on the delivery box that says the date of delivery, the product, the amount, and who the product is going to be delivered to. And yes, that is perfectly acceptable for traceability. Go ahead.
One of the things of traceability, I mean, it's great if you can narrow it down, but you also need to think about the crop. What are your odds of having to do a recall? The strawberries, it's probably higher than something like sweet corn. And how much trouble is it worth to go to that extra? Is it good enough to say it's one field on May 15th, or do I break it down by varieties within that field or sections within that field? And sometimes you can go a little too crazy, I think, with doing that. You have to look at how many strawberries. Is it a small farm? Our onion co-op, for example, and you saw that the way they pack, but when they pack, they only pack one farmer's product at a time, and that farmer's number goes on the box along with the date of delivery. We do not break it down beyond the farm. Now, for the most part, our farmers are all growing out of one field. Some of them may have two different fields, but they feel that if there would be a recall, they would probably recall everything from the farm. And so the reality of it is, when there's a recall on a farm, and let's say you have 3 fields of strawberries, if there's a recall that they found salmonella on those strawberries, you're going to have a hard time finding any buyers probably for any of your fields in reality. So the market may kind of dictate that as well. So there's a lot to think about there when you decide how small to make your lots or how big. But yeah, I think the other thing is making sure that you have a record of where those strawberries went. So it's one thing to say you know where they came from. It's also another thing to know where they went, and that's why you make sure somehow on your invoicing that you know who bought strawberries on that day. Because if we find salmonella from one buyer, then they're going to want you to go to all the other buyers that you sold strawberries to that day. So that's the other side of it as well.
Right. There is another question about recall. And now I can't find it for some reason. All right, so Kelly also asked, for your first USDA GAP or USDA GAP or USDA harmonized audit, those are 2 different audits, is it required to have all logs completely filled out? I was told or read somewhere that for your first audit, you don't have to have all your logs completely filled in. You just have to show that you have them and that you'll be filling them out moving forward.
That's so when, yeah, one of the questions on the audit is, we go out and look at your records from the past year. Now, obviously, if you've been keeping logs or records for a couple of years, we have a whole year to look at. But if you if an auditor would come out, and let's say you're just the first week into harvest, they would want to see everything should be filled out that should have been filled out to that point. Now, if you haven't started your cooler yet and you had to keep a cooler log, obviously, that's that's important. One of the things, the flip side of that is, and I've run into this with farmers, is we want the audit early in the harvest season because their buyers require it. And then once the auditor leaves, they get this sense of, well, we passed the test. We don't need to fill out the logs anymore. When you come back the following year, they're going to want to see that you filled out the logs after they were there the last time. So I guess I'm kind of getting around that question in a different way. But yes, you need to have everything that should be filled out up to that point, but you can't fill out things, obviously,
haven't done yet.
So
the obvious things are worker training that should have been done. Animal monitoring should have started, because you start doing that as soon as you planted a crop. Water tests should have been, at least one water test of a well or a surface water should have been done before you started harvesting. And usually you want a surface water, they'll want 2 tests by the time you start harvesting. Possibly some equipment cleaning. You want to, if you're harvesting, you want to be harvesting when the auditor comes, because they want to see the process of harvesting and packing, the processes. So you should have equipment cleaning, a log of your equipment cleaning before you even begin to harvest or pack. So there may be auditors out there who let that go, but you can't count on that. And there are just things you need to have started before they show up on the farm.
Yeah, certainly want to have logs on everything up to that point. And then for the following year, what the difference between the first year and the second year is that the second year they will want to see all of the logs filled out from the time they were there the last year, not from the beginning of the season. So you'll make sure that you keep filling those logs out as you go forward. But yeah, they certainly wouldn't want you to fill out things, pre-harvest risk assessments on fields that you haven't started to harvest yet, for example.
But you must have the pre-harvest risk assessment filled out if you have started harvesting, because that's an immediate fail. And if you don't have, if you have obviously filled out all of your logs in one day, that will fail. You'll fail your audit. If they come back the next year and you haven't been keeping good records, you're likely to fail your audit. So records they're there for several hours, one day a year. The only way they know that you're implementing your plan is the records that you keep. So they're very important. And yeah, I don't think you can get away even the first year of not having any records. Let's see, I'm going to go up to these questions. That's the same one. What is distinctly different between Canada Gap and Harmonized Gap? You want to take that one, Jeff, since you're now figuring out Canada Gap?
The difference between Harmonized and Canada Gap? We're still working through that, I guess. Canada Gap is, for their food safety plan, they have a binder about this thick that they give you, and you go through and you check off things that pertain to the crops that you grow. So it's a very detailed plan that needs to be filled out. They require more detail in terms of supplies that you use on the farm, fertilizers, pesticides, organic or not. They want to, for example, they want to see letters of assurance from all of your input suppliers, whether that's the plastic drip, the irrigation, anything, or the boxes, all of those things. Just a lot more detail. They would like to see you calibrate your fertilizer, spreaders, sprayers, obviously, and have a record of that. A lot of the things that we do anyway, but they would like to see, again, for their audit, that you would keep logs and records of all of that. So it tends to be a little higher level of detail, and some of the things that they request sometimes go a little bit beyond food safety, and it's just another level of magnitude, I think, for detail and records that need to be kept. But as we find out, I think once you go through a system for a year or two, it becomes much easier. The challenge I think we've had is that about the time we figure out one system, the buyers ask for another one, and so we feel like we're always having to start over with a with a new system. But yeah.
Mm. And then, as Jeff talked about earlier, Canada GAP is GFSI benchmark, so Global Food Safety Initiative benchmarked. And right now, the USDA harmonized GAP and also Global GAP does a harmonized GAP. They are not yet GFSI benchmarked, although they're in the process of making that happen.
One of the things, one of the things the GFSI audits look for is they don't want the same auditor on your farm more than 3 years. So after 3 years, you have to find another auditor. They prefer to bring folks in from out of the area. So if your neighbor, even somebody 30 miles away, is a Canada GAP auditor, more than likely they won't be allowed to audit in state. So there's more cost involved in bringing auditors in. They're much more conscious about conflicts of interest and relationships building up between auditors and farms. And so there seems to be another, probably double the cost for a Canada GAP audit as opposed to a harmonized audit. And it probably wouldn't stop at that.
Okay. So another question is, so if this is the first year for a farm audit, do you need to complete a mock recall? And for the USDA harmonized audit, it may be sufficient the first time around to just have a complete and up-to-date list of the buyers that you sell to, and good records. Well, you may not have any records yet of selling to anybody, but presumably you will. Again, you want to schedule the audit during harvest time. So presumably you will have made some sales by then, and you should have some invoices and harvest records. And so you want to, all of the things that you say you're doing in your recall, in your traceability program, you want to have in place. And one of those is a complete buyer contact list. And you can, and then you can show invoices so that you can show the auditor where product went and on what day and so on. So yeah, you may not have to do a complete mock recall that first year. But it's generally pretty easy to do if you have a friendly buyer, someone who knows you well. You don't want to go to a really big buyer and say mock recall because it might scare them. But at this point, most of them understand what a mock recall is. They just might not want to take the time to do it. But if you have someone that you work with a lot and you're very friendly with, they're usually quite happy to help you do a mock recall.
I like to call it a traceability exercise.
Yeah.
Just take that recall word away.
That's a good idea.
Just so there's no potential to create pandemonium in the marketplace because somebody missed the word mock or didn't understand the word mock.
Yeah. Okay, I think those are all the questions. Oh, hang on. No, hang on. Oh dear, there's lots more questions. Hold on a second. Water tests was an issue that was brought up on our survey results from the last webinar. They really wanted more information about where to get the tests and specifics about water testing.
Can we jump into that?
Yep, jump into that one.
Okay. Water tests are, first of all, the labs, harmonized audit says that your lab should be GLP certified. GLP stands for Good Lab Practices, and it is essentially, it's an audit that labs go through. We find there's not a lot of labs that we use that have done that. However, our USDA auditors had been satisfied if we would go to a lab that has state accreditation. So some labs are accredited by the state of Pennsylvania through DEP to do public water tests. So if you want to get a water test for a well or something, you have to take it to a certified lab. So what we ask our labs if they are state certified, and if they are, then those are the ones that we've used. Now, when we get into FSMA, we talked about this a lot, and there's a lot of confusion around FSMA's requirements, even among everybody that I ask up to FDA, and FDA is not really sharing a lot. FDA is in the process of looking at the water testing requirements and the regulation to see if they can simplify it. The testing procedure protocol that they specified in FSMA is difficult to find labs doing that. But there's also a line in there under FSMA that says you can use other methods that are equivalent. FDA has not given us a lot of guidance. So I guess I would say from FSMA, just wait for a while to see what is coming. I think what will be coming for FSMA will hopefully be simplified sometime, hopefully again within the next year or so. Our small farmers have until 2020 to comply with FSMA. But from a GAP standpoint, as long as the lab that you are going to is an accredited lab, that's good enough for just about any of the certifying bodies or the standards that I can think of. The one thing you do want to make sure you do when you get a water test is have them make sure that they give you a number for the results, not just a pass-fail, because they often are looking at the public health standard, which is 0 E. coli. And so if you have 1 or 2, you will get a fail. I always tell our farmers, make sure you ask for a number. I want to know if you have 2 E. coli, or if you have 20 E. coli, or if you have 2,000 E. coli, because that does make a difference for food safety. So at this point, that's the main thing I think I would ask for, is make sure they have a number, make sure they're accredited.
So it should be reported in CFUs per 100 mils. So colony forming units per 100 mils is the number that you want to get.
Yes.
And it should be, you said this already, a state or federally accredited lab, right? And they should have their accreditation number or their registration number that they can give you as well. And sometimes that's on the water test report itself, but you can also call and ask for it. So everyone told me how to get back to Callie's question about the recall. So she was asking if you can just have a recall program that documents how you'll respond in the event of an outbreak, who's the person on the farm that will talk to the media, the farm's lawyer, the number listed, etc., all the ways that the farm will respond. That most food safety plans that I've seen haven't gone into quite as much detail about how all the different people beyond the farm that are going to be involved if there is an actual recall. Generally speaking, when I help people write a plan, we just say that this is the person, the food safety manager, and anyone else who's on their food safety team is responsible in the event of a recall. And we go through the steps we'll take if the farm realizes that they need to recall something. So talking, getting hold of the the truck driver, getting hold of the buyer, saying we have a problem, don't allow that product to go into the consumer supply stream. I don't usually tell people to go into all the detail about having a lawyer's number and who will talk to the media. That doesn't really need to be in your food safety plan. That's a plan you may want to have if you're, it is a plan you need to have. And I know Jeff has organized for a lawyer to speak at the Hershey conference for the last couple of years, talking about a true recall plan. If the FDA shows up and says we have to recall all of this product, then you need to have a team in place. But that all of that doesn't have to be in your food safety plan. I don't think that what they want to see, particularly for a harmonized audit, is that you have a way of recalling product if you think there's a problem before you get to the lawyers and the media getting involved.
Yeah, we have a whole recall readiness thing that we've talked about at Hershey for a couple of years. And that FDA occasionally will go around to farms, farm markets, auctions, stores. They will buy, a couple of years ago, they were getting cantaloupes and tomatoes and testing them for listeria, E. coli, salmonella. And on occasion, they would find a positive hit, then they would trace it back to the farm. And so then you get the phone call, you know, from FDA. And so we talked a little bit at what do you do when the FDA calls? And, you know, so there's kind of a procedure. It's nice to have a few folks that you would call to help you out in that situation. And yeah, and then you decide at what point you need to issue a recall, at what point you need to, you know, contact a lawyer. So yeah, that's a whole nother, probably a whole nother webinar that we could do on that.
Yeah. But just in terms of your food safety plan, I don't think it's necessary to have all those numbers in there. It perhaps, Callie, you're in California, so maybe it's different there, but the auditors in Pennsylvania don't really expect that sort of detail. Just really how you're going to handle it if you want to get product back from the truck or from the customer before it gets sold or fed to people. What time are we at? 10:07. I have a few more slides. What were you going to say, Jeff?
Just Jennifer had a question there about starting water samples for FSMA. You have 2 additional years to comply with the water standards for FSMA. So if you come into compliance next January, for example, the largest farms will need to start January of 18. They have 2 years after that to get their water tests done that they need to. So they will need to actually start testing you know, once that deadline hits. We hope that, as I mentioned, FDA gives us some clear guidance soon, or else they will need to extend the deadlines. So we're kind of hoping that we have some clarity on that, certainly by next winter.
Jennifer, I would say there's probably a little bit of leeway for you, being as it's all just starting to happen now. So do the best you can, but I don't think they're going to come down on you hard if you haven't done all of the tests they're requiring right now, particularly since they're still deciding on the guidelines they're going to give us on how many water tests need to be done. Jennifer also asked, our auditor was asking for letters of assurance for all packaging. Sounds similar to Canada Gap. So Jennifer, we don't know what kind of audit you were getting. If it was harmonized Gap, that probably means they were adding in the global marketing addendum, which requires assurance for anything, all of the things that you supply. So any seeds or transplants or packaging. So it was harmonized Gap without global.
Yeah, we've had to do that. We've had to do that at the Onion Packing Shed for the audits that they've done up there for, and that was part of the harmonized. The harmonized didn't require it for our fertilizers as much, but they did require it for packing materials. And that's just a matter of contacting your packing supply companies. Most of them by now, hopefully, would have a letter on file that they can fax out to you. I know when we did it, again, with those onion growers, we had one company that we had to repeatedly get back to until they finally sent us something. The other companies just said, yeah, we'll fax it right out. So yeah,
it is in the harmonized standard that any packaging materials have to be food grade. So that's probably why they're asking for that. It really depends on the auditor, because we haven't had any, unless it's for the global marketing addendum, we haven't had that kind of question too much yet, but it will come. Have I missed any questions? I don't think so. So I'm going to zip through these slides. Oops, hold on. Go back. Very quickly, if anyone out there is working on urban farms or interested in urban farms, So actually at one of the food safety trainings that we did earlier this year, rural farmers were asking, what are urban farmers doing? They were very suspicious of urban farmers. The rural farmer was feeling like they had all this burden of food safety, and then there were these urban farmers who were just cowboys doing whatever they wanted. And in fact, there were urban farmers. I've been working with quite a lot of urban farmers this year in Pittsburgh and elsewhere. So yes, they are in fact very concerned about food safety. And now that they're starting to aggregate product and sell to wholesalers, they have buyers who are asking them about food safety. And really, it's not that different from from a rural farm. So I'm just going to zip through some of the things that came up for urban farmers that mostly apply to rural farmers. There's only one or two that are different. So one of the biggest questions was, we have a lot of visitors. Now this would be true for a UPIC farm or for any farm that does agritourism. It comes up quite a lot with orchards because of UPIC. And it certainly is an issue for a food safety issue for urban farms. So one of the things with urban farms is they very often have a learning element, and they don't want to discourage people from visiting the farm. So one of the things you can do to mitigate risk from all these visitors is, once again, to post signs, and having really good signs. If you have a UPIC operation, having really good signs at your station where people come in to pick up their picking containers and so on is a way of reinforcing your commitment to food safety and making sure people know that you have a food safety program in place, ensuring that you have bathroom facilities for them and hand washing facilities for them, and insisting that they wash their hands before they start picking is really important. But signs probably won't be enough, and particularly if you have an educational element, if you're doing trainings or bringing school kids onto the farm to learn about farming and food, then you need to make food safety part of your training. So you want to educate people. You want to make, as I said, make food safety part of the education you provide, and you want to train your staff to train people on food safety and to enforce the food safety rules that you have. And on days when you expect a lot of visitors, you may need more staff or volunteers on site to just keep track of things. It's very, they're key things. Obviously, if people are bringing children, they have to watch their children. If there are children who are still in diapers, they probably shouldn't be carrying them out into the field when they're picking. So you want to have a strict no pet policy. People often think they can take their dogs wherever they go, which is sweet, but not good for food safety. And make sure you have a food safety kit. And as I said, provide toilets and hand washing stations with clear signage. Something that comes up is there's no barrier in urban farms between the farm and traffic or spaces where people gather, like the bus stop on the corner. And again, urban farmers don't necessarily want to discourage the folks in the neighborhood from seeing what's going on at the farm, but they do want to discourage them from just damaging, vandalizing, or taking advantage of the situation. So you may want to try some sort of green buffer. Planters or prickly berries is quite a good thing. They look really good, but they're also not something people want to walk through. Something that's still attractive, an attractive demonstration of growing food, but isn't harvested for sale is a good idea. Oh, and something else about you pick, if it's at all possible, separating where people pick and where you pick for wholesale is probably one of the surest ways of mitigating risk. It's not always possible, obviously, depending on the size of the farm. Another problem can be grimy urban street dust. This is something that I hadn't thought about, but when I was on urban farms recently in Pittsburgh, they ran their finger down the side of a harvest bucket and said, I deal with this dust all the time. Now on a dusty farm, you can have the same thing. But I think the same kind of vegetative buffers can be helpful to filter that kind of dust as well. Although it may cause you to have shade where you don't want shade. You have to figure out what's going to work for you. There are now animals on farms, urban farms, just as there are on rural farms. So again, you want to think about fences, buffer zones, barriers to prevent manure runoff from contaminating crops. This brings in the whole issue of changing outer clothing and footwear when you're going between working with animals and produce. That's true for rural and urban farms. On urban farms, crops and animals are in pretty tight quarters, but with proper thought, you can still manage the problem if there are any problems. And you want to, if you're using raw manure on rows of crops in close proximity and at different stages of growth, so you're harvesting several rows of crops, and right next to it you've got something where you've just put down chicken manure and you're getting ready to plant seed or plant transplants, you want to make sure that you're managing that, putting in some kind of buffer zone between those two crops. It's a little bit tougher when you have much smaller farms, but you still have to think these things through. And you want to, so you take extra care in calculating the time to harvest and try to create some kind of buffer, as I said. And then you want to check to see how water flows. Even a little change in topography can help or hurt when it comes to runoff. And then again, as with rural farms, feral cats, birds, rodents, groundhogs, rabbits, raccoons, they all share the environment, even in the city. Not so much large wildlife such as deer, but you even get raptors, which is actually a good thing because they kill off the smaller rodents. So feral cats and pet dogs can be really helpful at keeping some critters in check, the ones that actually feed on the crops, but you still have to think about how to keep these helpers out of the crops and on the periphery, especially where and when you're harvesting. So dogs, as I said earlier, you can train them or you can tie them up. One suggestion, if you're dealing with a lot of feral cats, is to use a motion sensor water spray just to keep them on the periphery and out of the crop rows themselves. And then a question that came up that I hadn't really thought about, and this is to do with scale. You should always check for footprints, crop damage, feces, etc. before harvesting. And typically the practice is if you find evidence of animal damage or intrusion or animal poop, the practice is to flag a 2 to 3 foot area around the spot and discard that produce and not harvest it and get rid of it. However, when you're only growing 5 to 10 feet of something, such as in these raised bed boxes in the right-hand photograph, 2 to 3 feet could take up a good chunk of that box. So you really have to think about how much of a risk it is, how much product you need to take out of circulation. And you don't want to write on your food safety plan that you're flagging 2 to 3 feet if it's not a practical thing to do. So you do what is practical and what makes sense. Theft of equipment is something that doesn't typically come up on rural farms, but it certainly does on urban farms. One of the farmers had found this beautiful, not this particular one, but a beautiful set of a 3-bay stainless steel sink, and he installed it, and then the next week it was gone. So security is an issue, and unfortunately it discourages the urban farmers from installing good looking and potentially more food safe equipment. So on urban farms, they really have to think about how to chain that thing down so it doesn't disappear. Something that's come up, it came up on the urban farms, but it's true for rural farms, is fish fertilizer as a foliar spray. Fish fertilizer under the FDA rules is considered, what are they calling it? Anything from animal origin is considered a food safety risk, even if it isn't animal manure. And even though there's no evidence that fish fertilizer or fish feces are a food safety concern, the burden of proof is on the farmer, as Jeff always likes to tell me. So if you're using it to dip the roots into when you're transplanting, that's probably not an issue. But if you're spraying it, using it as a foliar spray, or as these farmers were spraying it on tomatoes close to harvest to form a disease protective biofilm, that could be a problem. And you have to decide if it's worth it to you to stop using the fish fertilizer so you can get audited, or if you just take tomatoes out of the covered produce or the certified produce when you're getting audited. You have to decide on your return on investment basically with an audit. And you could also ask all of your scientific friends to do some studies to see where the fish fertilizer is actually a problem. That's what we really need, is some good scientific papers on the food safety risk of using it as a foliar spray. We don't have that yet. I've just thrown in this guidance on aquaponics. I'm not going to go through this, but if you want to look into how the USDA is viewing aquaponics in terms of food safety auditing, this is what they gave us. And then there's also a concern, particularly among urban farmers, actually, about overuse of sanitizers. There was one farmer who was growing cabbages for someone else to make sauerkraut, raw sauerkraut from, and he didn't want to have Sanidate on the product itself. Now, cabbages he didn't need to wash, but there may have been other things like cucumbers and zucchini that had that nasty, sticky urban dust on them that needed to be washed. Really, the only solution I had for him was to use a single pass spray system for washing the product rather than dunking it, so that he didn't need to use sanitizer as long as the water was potable. And just an FYI, I have Clorox up here. Clorox is actually no longer labeled for sanitizing food or food contact surfaces. I guess the company decided they didn't want to be liable. So unfortunately, Clorox is no longer an option for sanitizing, for food contact surfaces anyway. Oops, I went backwards instead of forwards, sorry. So I generally say to people, the less water you can use in harvesting and packing, the better. It's really best to avoid wetting the harvest produce if you can at all. Of course, there are some crops that benefit from hydrocooling. So you just have to put in place the sanitization, the standard operating procedure for using sanitizer if you're doing hydrocooling of any kind, even if it's just dunking into a tub and shaking it off. If you're repeatedly using that water, then you need to use sanitizer. But if possible, if there are any way that you can avoid having to use water on the crop, that reduces the risk of contamination and spreading contamination throughout the crop. So here are the things that I tell people. You want to harvest early and late. Obviously, most people want to do that anyway because you don't want to be working in the heat of the day. But on urban farms, that can actually be tough to do. I tell people as much as possible to grow clean. And if you can see the picture that I have behind here, this is a garlic farm that I went to a couple of weeks ago where he has rye growing in between the rows, and then he's got plastic mulch on the rows, and it really helps to keep when it rains, you don't get so much mud splashing up on things. So if you were doing this with a leafy green, that would really help to keep it clean, so you didn't need to wash it before you sold it. Use a dry brush packing line as much as you can rather than having a spray step on the packing line. Allow produce to dry off before harvesting, and if you do have, if possible, after a rainstorm or after you have done any kind of irrigation. Use drip irrigation. I didn't actually put that on there. If possible, use drip irrigation. So yeah, allowing produce to dry off before harvesting, packing, and storing really helps to reduce risk. And if you are actually, something like the onions, which are stored for quite a long time before they're sold in some cases because they have to be cured, that dry off, that period of allowing the product to dry off helps to what they call die off of pathogens. So any crop that has that kind of, if the process allows for that kind of drying off period, then you really lower the risk of contamination. So that's us. Let's see, are there any more questions? Somebody, Heidi, you wanted us to go a little bit more detail into GFSI, which is the Global Food Safety Initiative. It's an NGO in Europe that was set up to, as Jeff said earlier, to benchmark food safety programs, food safety audit programs, or food safety standards and food safety audit programs. They don't actually, GFSI doesn't have, they're not an owner of an audit program or a certifying body. They simply benchmark. What they do is look at all the elements of a food safety program and make sure it meets baseline criteria. So what the idea is to have equivalency between food safety programs. So trying to reduce what they call audit fatigue, where you have several buyers wanting different audits from the same farm. So the idea is that if you are GFSI, if the audit program that you're audited to is GFSI benchmark, then you don't need to have 3 other audits from 3 other certifying bodies. Are there any other questions, or are we?
Jennifer had a question there on cotton work gloves to harvest and pack produce. This is the one we've
we go back and forth
we've
on
talked
this
about
one.
this for a year or more.
Yeah. So what? Actually, it's a little bit of it's going to be a little bit of a test case this year. What I have suggested is that if you really want to use cotton gloves, the language you can use in your food safety plan is that you use cotton gloves as soon as there's any inkling that they may have become contaminated, you discard them, and you, at the end of each day, they're either discarded or they're washed, so that you're never using gloves from the day before. It's going to depend a little bit on the auditor whether they accept that, because the harmonized standard they don't want you to be using gloves or cloths unless they're single use. But a lot of people do use cotton gloves, and I think they're actually a useful thing.
Yeah, we've had this discussion a lot with folks, and they say, well, it's the potential to cross-contaminate from one tomato to the next. The other side of that argument is farmers say, if I use cotton gloves, then I don't need to use wash water. I don't even need to use a packing line. And packing lines, by their nature, cross-contaminate, from one tomato to the next. And so, as Lindsay said, it depends a lot on interpretation. And I would write something into your plan on why you feel cotton gloves are better. And the things that we mention are things like, it prevents a wash step. And again, you want to, like Lindsay mentioned, you want to have a way to clean those. The farmer that I talked to a few years ago he had gotten a source of very cheap cotton gloves, and he was throwing them out at the end of each day. So he essentially was wearing new cotton gloves. My argument to the other the folks who didn't like gloves was that your bare hands can cross-contaminate tomatoes as well as cotton gloves. And we wash our hands before we come to work, but we certainly don't wash them between tomatoes. So if we think of the cotton gloves as being sanitized like your hands would be, so either they're washed as often as your hands would be or they're discarded, I think you could make the case. If you take a pair of cotton gloves and use them all season long, then I think you'd have a problem there. But if you've got a wash schedule or disposable gloves, you could make the case.
I mean, you could use the same policy you use for the disposable gloves that you have to use if you've cut yourself or whatever. I mean, you're making sure that the gloves are not getting contaminated, and if they are, you discard them. We have like 1 minute left, and Callie is feeding us really great questions. Clearly, Callie could be leading this whole webinar herself. So for the harmonized audit, does it list all the crops that you included? Yes, what the auditor is looking for is processes rather than specific crops. So if you have a whole bunch of crops that are harvested and packed the same way, as long as they have an opportunity to see that process, then they can list all of those crops on your certificate and say that they were audited. Yeah, so if you're a diversified farm and you're growing lots of different things, you can actually get all of those certified with one audit, or one audit and some unannounced audits, depending on how long you're growing. Anyway, I can't go into more detail now. Probably Heidi wants to say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate all of your incredible knowledge and expertise in this. I just want to remind people that this will become available on our website, on Pennsylvania Farmers Union's website, along with other resources from Penn State Extension. We're trying to create a network of networks on our website in terms of trying to bring all of the information around FSMA in one space. So thank you for participating, and if there's any further questions, please feel free to contact us, and you'll be receiving a survey, and we hope to be able to answer any more questions you have. Lindsay's information is there, Jeff's information is there. Feel free to reach out to them, and we appreciate you being on today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oops.